think he's telling you do not enter.
David Rice is a 15-year-old teenager living in a small town. His mother apparently left when David was only 5, and according to David, his father wasn't doing a good job at being one. After having classes for the day, he approached his crush, Millie, who was getting ready to leave. He notices there are a lot of pictures of several places pinned in her locker and comments on how much they are. Millie then replies that she has dreams to travel the world. At the end of the school period, all the students gather outside where the buses are waiting. David then approaches Millie again to gift her a snow globe. Suddenly, the school bully, Mark, yanks the globe off Millie's hands and starts making fun of David. Millie tries to control the situation, but Mark doesn't listen to her. When she finally gets through to him, Mark apologizes and attempts to return the globe. But before David can reach out to retrieve it, Mark tosses the globe at the center of a frozen lake. David, however, immediately goes after the globe, despite Millie calling him back and asking him not to worry about it since it isn't safe. But he didn't listen and made it to the center, where he grabbed the globe. He turns around to tell Millie that it's all good, but that's when the frozen lake suddenly gives way.
All good, see?
He tries to swim back up, but every attempt has the currents pulling him further in. Millie freaks out and tries to go after him, but Mark holds her back because it isn't safe. While they are at it, David is suddenly pulled by a force, and the next thing he knows, he is at the regional library, confused as to how he got there. He staggers out of the place and walks back home to where he lives with his father. On entering the house, William tells him that he's late and that supper has gotten cold. He then asks David where he has been, but David doesn't answer and starts heading to his room. This behavior upsets William, who walks up to him and grabs him by the clothes before realizing David is soaking wet. When he asks David what happened, David tells him it was the fault of some kids from school and rushes upstairs. William then yells after him to get a mop and come back down to clean the trail of water he was leaving. David, however, rushes into his room and locks his door.
David!
William comes up, banging at the door, and asks David to open up. Just as he manages to break in, David teleports again on impulse. He finds himself back inside the regional library again. At this point, David is beginning to understand that he suddenly has the ability to teleport. He returns to his bedroom again using his newfound abilities, but he wastes no time and reaches the conclusion that his new powers could set him free and give him the life he has always wished for. He grabs all the cash in his savings in hopes of running away from home. Meanwhile, Millie is at home mourning David. Turns out everyone thinks David died in the lake accident. Suddenly, she hears a noise outside and looks out the window to see a swing moving. When she comes out to check it out, she finds the globe David had tried to gift her earlier.
Teleport to the library.
This gives her hope that David is still alive, but no matter how much she calls him, David doesn't show up. He wanted to tell her everything, but he figured no one would believe him anyway. By the dawn of the following day, David is well on his way to a big city. He arrives at a motel where he books a room for 2 days. Afterward, he goes to a quiet area to try to figure out how his powers work and practices a little on how he can control them. Later that evening, he returns to his motel room where he can be seen flipping through the pages of a book with tourist attractions, trying to teleport to any of those places. When he comes across the Empire State Building, he remembers how he used to visit the place with his mom. Suddenly, David teleports to the State Building, and that's when he realizes that he can only teleport to the places he has been to before. With this new discovery, the first place David decides to head to is the Emigrant Savings Bank.
I'd like a room.
He walks up to a security guard already plotting how his heist would go. When he asks to use the customer's bathroom, the guard is hesitant initially, but then decides to escort him. On their way to the bathroom, David notices the bank's vault. Later that day, after returning to his room, he gears up and grabs a bag, then teleports to the bank vault. Seeing so much money lying around, he realizes he will need a bigger bag. He then teleports back to his room and grabs his blanket instead. David David makes several trips to and from the vault until he is satisfied with how much money he has obtained. The next day, Roland Cox arrives at the bank, claiming to be from the NSA. He is actually the leader of the Paladins, an organization that believes that jumpers, or people who can teleport, are abominations that must be eradicated. The bank manager explains what had happened, claiming that the security measures the vault comes with aren't something someone would break into easily and not get caught. Roland requests the security tapes and the names of everyone who has a safety deposit box inside the vault. The bank manager declines, saying such information cannot be disclosed.
11.
Roland then tells him that whoever robbed their bank has been in the vault before, so he must have those tapes and names. 8 years later, David is all grown up, living a luxurious life in a penthouse in New York, with pictures of everywhere he's ever been pasted across the walls. He teleports around the house freely, showing that he has completely mastered how his powers work. He even has a room where he stores money in different currencies from all the places he's ever been to. David now does things like teleporting to bars in London just to have fun. That night, he teleports to a random girl who piqued his interest, carelessly bumping into a guy named Griffin. Griffin notices David teleporting, but he just stands there staring.
So, you live in London?
The following day, David teleports to Fiji to surf the waves, and the next day he has a solo picnic on the top of the Sphinx in Egypt. Meanwhile, somewhere on a tropical island, a man makes several attempts at teleporting, but fails due to a cable that is attached to his body. The cable holds him in place at a tree, restricting him from making any movements. Roland then shows up with a dagger. When the man asks Roland why he is doing this, Roland tells him he is an abomination. Afterward, Roland gets a call regarding a lead on the bank robbery that happened years back. Later that day, David returns to his apartment to find Roland there. It appears that Roland has figured out that David was their culprit in the robbery case. David realizes that Roland is not the police and starts plotting his escape. Roland, however, takes out a baton and reveals to David that he knows he has the power to jump places.
Oh, I know who you are.
Just then, David tries to teleport, but barely goes as far as behind Roland. He tries to teleport again, but Roland calls him back with the special baton, zapping him. David then makes yet another attempt again and only makes it to a wall with his photos. This time, he tries using the photos so he can jump to a different state, but realizes that Roland's baton somehow interferes with his powers. Thankfully, he finds a way to escape by teleporting into a room, causing the walls to break the connection with the baton. Before Roland can get to him, David packs some cash and teleports back to his old room back at home. William hears the sound coming from the room and rushes upstairs, begging him not to leave. He tells David that he doesn't know if he's going crazy and rushes to get chain cutters, still pleading with David not to go. When he returns to the door to cut the chain, he tells David that he's free to come home anytime he wants. But David tells him that he's not crazy and teleports just before William breaks in, leaving the man confused.
Where you going, huh?
Back in the penthouse, Roland calls his team to inform them that he may have lost David, but now they have access to all his jump sites. During his investigations, he also finds some pictures and information on little Millie lying around the house. Meanwhile, David arrives at Millie's home to ask for her whereabouts. When he introduces himself to Millie's mother, Mrs. Harris, she is both shocked and happy to see that Millie was right the whole time about David being alive. She gives him a hug before sharing Millie's address with him. David is surprised to find out that Millie is still around, given that she had dreams to travel the world. Mrs. Harris also informs David that Millie works at a bar downtown, so he heads there. At the bar, David watched Millie for a while before deciding to leave. On his way out, he bumps into a longtime classmate and a familiar face, Mark. David pretends not to know him, but Mark insists that he knows David and wants to grab a beer with him.
Come on. I'm sure you can think of something.
They get into a fight, and David ends up teleporting Mark to the bank Emigrant Savings Bank vault. Mark is confused and scared, but David leaves him there and returns to the bar. Millie, who had noticed David, rushes up to him to ask if he was okay. She reveals that she saw him when he walked in, and she knows he was staring at her for the past 45 minutes. She asks him about Mark, and David tells her that Mark took off. The duo returns to the bar to catch up on lost times. David points out to her that he expected her to be traveling the world, but Millie claims she grew up. When she asks David what he does for a living, David tells her he is into banking. With the assumption that David is back in town, she asks him what he plans to do now. David then tells her that he's going to check out Rome, knowing fully well that it was Millie's dream to visit that place. Even better, David asks her to come with him, knowing it's an offer she cannot decline.
Guess I don't know my own strength.
The following day, the duo arrives at Rome. At the entrance of the hotel, David forcefully yanks his backpack off the chauffeur, saying he'll carry it. Millie doesn't read any meaning into it. Instead, she smiles and walks into the building with David. Back at the station, Roland tries to intervene with questioning Mark. He tells the detective that he is with the CIA, but the detective denies him access, saying he wants to see a federal warrant before he can let Roland in. Seeing as things was going nowhere, Roland knocks out the detective and enters the interrogation room. Roland confronts Mark regarding what happened in the vault, but Mark feels reluctant because he knows no one would believe him. When Roland shows interest in what he has to say, Mark goes ahead to reveal everything he knows about David and Millie. Roland then exits the station on a call with his team, informing them about finding Millie, who's currently in Rome.
Says here you were beamed into the vault.
Back in the hotel room, Millie gets a little suspicious about David's lifestyle. She strongly disagrees with him that banking got him so much luxury, but David insists that he's telling the truth. Later, the duo heads out on a date. They eat at a fancy restaurant and then head to the Colosseum, which Millie claims has been her lifelong dream to visit. Meanwhile, Griffin watches them from a distance, worried at how much trouble David was getting himself into. On the other hand, as the duo reaches the entrance of the Colosseum, the guards stop them, saying the place is closing. David insists, saying they only want to see around a little and leave, but the guards refuse. While Millie's still standing there, David goes around and teleports himself in, then lets Millie in. When she asks about how the gates were open, David tells her it was just open and offers her a private tour. She is hesitant at first, but follows David in any way.
You know, you could have just asked me out on a date.
The two of them head into the Colosseum to do some sightseeing. While inside, Millie shows interest in the gladiator ring. Without wasting time, David teleports in unseen and opens the door leading there. And as usual, Millie doesn't question him and just agrees when he says the door is open. Unfortunately, the main door to the ring is locked. After several attempts to force it open, David suggests that Millie wait while he goes around the back to open it. When he walks out of sight, he teleports himself into the ring, where he encounters Griffin. Griffin warns him not to open the door unless he wants Millie to be in danger. He mocks David for playing around, thinking it is okay. But when David tries to confront him, Griffin teleports, revealing that he is just like David. With David speechless, Griffin goes ahead to warn him about his constant teleporting and how there are consequences. He also warns David about the paladins. Just then, two paladin soldiers show up and attack David and Griffin. Griffin fights them off effortlessly, but the sound draws the attention of a worker. The worker alerts the police, prompting Griffin to teleport. David follows him immediately and enters Griffin's jump scar, a small wormhole that people like them create whenever they teleport. The jump scar takes them to Griffin's hideout in the middle of the desert. Griffin is surprised to see David and warns him to leave. He claims David is not supposed to be here and should be going after Millie to make sure she's okay. Left with no choice, David teleports back to the Colosseum and back to Millie. He takes her and rushes out of the place, claiming everything is fine when she asks. On exiting the building, David gets arrested by the local police. He urges Millie to head back to the hotel, but Millie insists on following him. At the station, David gets interrogated by an officer. He accuses David of the mess, while David denies knowing anything about it.
Who are these people?
Just then, another officer comes to report that the magistrate has arrived. The officer in charge of the interrogation tells David that they will hold on to his passport since he wouldn't be needing it where he was going. After the officer exits the room, a woman walks in, telling David that he only has 30 seconds to leave before the paladins arrive. It turns out that the woman is David's mother, Mary. David calls after her, but she tells him to ditch Millie since he's putting her in danger. She then leaves without another word. David goes after her, but is attacked by one of the officers. In the spur of the moment, David teleports the officer to the top of the Sphinx, cuffs him, and teleports back to the station. He then rushes to Millie and escapes the station with her under the pretense that the police let him go. They quickly grab a cab and head back to the hotel. Early the next day, David and Mila arrive at the airport. David takes out a ticket and hands it to Millie, but before collecting it, Millie wants to hear the truth from David about what's really happening. She starts by asking him what was in his bag that was so precious to him. David then slightly opens the bag to reveal the wads of cash in his bag.
But you don't want to tell me the truth either.
Millie is taken aback and confronts him about the source. However, David tells her that he doesn't want to lie to her. Instead, he bids her goodbye and breaks it to her that he can't get on the flight with her. Without a word, Millie checks in her ticket while David turns and leaves. Meanwhile, Roland is informed that his men lost David yet again. Roland asks them to be on the lookout for him while he takes a different approach to finding David. On hanging up, Roland parks his car just outside of William's house. He introduces himself as IRS and asks to go inside and talk with William. Roland wants to know when was the last William saw David, and William tells him he last saw David 8 years ago. As for the question of friends, William reveals that David didn't have many friends. As Roland walks around the house, he finds a picture of Mary, with whom he is familiar.
When's the last time you saw her?
He pretends not to know, however, and asks William who she is. When William claims it is his wife, everything starts adding up for Roland. Feeling suspicious, William asks Roland out and assures him that he'll let him know if he hears anything. But Roland knows William won't say anything, so instead he attacks William. Back in Griffin's hideout, Griffin is busy playing video games when Davis teleports in, looking restless. He wants to know more about the Paladins, so Griffin tells him he goes after Paladins, whose main goal is to eradicate jumpers like them. He explains that the Paladins have been hunting jumpers for years now and would do anything to get their way, even if it involves ending a loved one. Realizing that his people might be in danger, David teleports to his home back in their small town. Unfortunately, the Paladins got his father. David immediately teleports his father to a hospital, but it is already too late.
Somebody get some help!
Afterward, he goes to the prison where Mark is being held to confront him about the things he told Roland. He threatens to drop Mark off on Mount Everest if he doesn't speak, so Mark reveals that he told Roland everything from their hometown to Millie. Frustrated, David returns to Griffin's lair to borrow a few things so he can get revenge on Roland. Griffin, on the other hand, tries to discourage him, saying Roland is a waste of time and that he'll handle Roland himself. David, however, suggests that they team up instead, but Griffin tells him to leave. David, ever stubborn, follows Griffin through his jump scar to the streets of Tokyo just to convince Griffin to partner up with him. There, David learns a new jump skill that Griffin has. He also finds out that Griffin started teleporting when he was 5. By morning, David tells Griffin that he has to catch Millie's flight when it lands. He offers to team up one more time, promising to go separate ways whether or not he saves Millie or kills her.
So we doing this or what?
Just then, Griffin teleports to the airport, and David follows suit. On arriving at the airport, they discover that Millie's flight landed an hour ago. Griffin tells David to find her and meet him at the lair while he goes back to the lair to gear up. David quickly teleports to the bar where Millie works, but her colleague claims she has no idea that Millie is back. However, she informs David that his friend Roland came by and that he left not too long ago. David panics and rushes out of the bar. He looks looks around the neighborhood for any signs of Roland, but finds nothing. He then teleports into Millie's apartment immediately. Luckily, he finds her safe and sound. But Millie is freaked out about how he got into her apartment. David then tries to convince her to go with him, but Millie gets fed up with David's secrets and lies. So she opens the door and asks him to leave. Unfortunately, David notices that the Paladins are here and sternly refuses to leave without Millie. Since Millie is so keen on finding out the truth, David confesses about how he got the money in the backpack and then teleports in her presence.
No, David, I'm not okay.
Millie freaks out and tries to run after this, but David stops her and forcefully teleports her into Griffin's lair. The thing is, David has no idea that the Paladins have a machine that lets them access a jump scar. While still in the lair, he goes to meet Griffin and tries to get him to understand that he had no choice but to bring Millie here. Griffin, however, is angry and warns David about the machine, but it is already too late. Roland and his partner jump in through the scar while David and Griffin hide somewhere in the lair. While hiding, David notices posters, articles, and pictures of his mom on Griffin's pinboard. That's when David finds out that his mom is actually a high-ranking official for the Paladins. Sadly, his reaction to the pinboard attracts Roland's attention. David is shot with their wired contraption that pins him to the wall and prevents him from teleporting.
David, what is going on?
Just before Roland can do anything else, Griffin attacks him with a flamethrower, and a fight ensues. Meanwhile, Millie returns to the lair to find David pinned to the wall. David tells her to run, but she doesn't listen. Griffin then launches another flamethrower attack that sends Roland and his men flying back through the jump scar and out of Millie's now wrecked apartment. He follows them through and engages Roland in a fierce fight. Back in the lair, Millie helps David down from his shackles and pleads with him to take her home and leave her alone. David agrees, but suddenly, Griffin teleports back to the lair, saying he trapped Roland there and took their machine. Just then, a wire shoots through the scar, and Millie gets pulled through, much to David and Griffin's surprise. In Millie's apartment, Roland ties her up as bait, knowing Griffin and David will have to come for her. Back in the lair, Griffin prepares a bomb with hopes of blowing up Millie's apartment to kill the Paladins. The downside to his idea is that Millie would have to be collateral. David, however, is completely against the idea and tries to talk Griffin out of it. But Griffin is serious and apologizes to David, saying they have to make small sacrifices. Out of panic, David grabs the detonator from Griffin and teleports. What follows is a back-and-forth teleportation from Rome to Egypt to random cities, back to Tokyo, and to the Empire State Building with fistfights on who gets the detonator. Their fight ultimately lands them in Chechen in the middle of a war, where David traps Griffin in between high-power cables, nubbing his teleportation. Griffin then tries to reason with him so David would cut him down, but David tells him it doesn't have to be this way. Griffin then warns him that if he goes back there alone, he won't make it out alive. However, David's mind is made up. David disarms the detonator and immediately teleports to Millie's house to save her, but he walks right into Roland's trap and gets pinned to the walls. He tries to teleport, but it backfires, tearing Millie's apartment apart. Roland, after finding his footing in the middle of the chaos, tells David that only God should have such powers, not them. Meanwhile, Millie apologizes for everything she said to David. David, now motivated by his love for her, tells her to brace herself. Instead of trying to teleport this time, David teleports Millie's section of the apartment complex into the lake back at their hometown, then into the regional library. Unfortunately, Roland is still there and tries to attack them. David then teleports Millie to a different aisle in the library, asking her to stay put. Roland tells David that he is impressed at the amount of power he can control, which is nothing compared to his petty crimes of robbing banks. David then dives at Roland and teleports him into a cave. He reminds Roland that he is different because he could have easily dropped him with the sharks. After having the last word, David teleports back to Millie, leaving Roland in the cave. When Roland rushes out to the cave entrance, he realizes he is at the Grand Canyon. Some days later, David tracks his mother to a snowy region where she lives. The door is answered by a girl around David's age, who refers to Mary as Mom. Mary comes out to check and is surprised to see David. She tells her daughter to excuse them and confronts David, saying he shouldn't be here. David, on the other hand, admits that it wasn't easy finding her, but he has come to confirm that his mother is one of the paladins. Mary confirms it and reveals that David was only 5 when he had his first jump, just like Griffin. She also tells him that back then she had only 2 choices: 1, to put an end to David's life, or 2, to leave him. Apparently, she chose the latter, but claims she did it to protect David. David then walks up to her, pointing out that since he's a jumper and she's a paladin, what happens next?
I'm gonna get you down so you can get me out of here.
Mary tells him she's giving him a head start because she loves him. She embraces him and wishes him luck before opening the door for him. David hesitates for a moment but leaves anyway since he has no choice. Somewhere outside, he spots Millie, who has been waiting for him. As he approaches her, she confirms that he is okay and asks that they go someplace warm because she is freezing cold. When David asks her where she wants to go, she tells him to surprise her. David then takes her hand and teleports with her. David spent years on the runs, teleporting himself from one place to another and robbing banks to survive. But in the end, he always came back to the one person who mattered to him the most, Millie. And even though she had every reason to turn him away, Millie chose to believe in him again like she did when they were kids. However, while David finally has someone by his side, do you think there's more danger ahead for him as a jumper? Remember that Roland is still alive, and let's not forget the head start from his mother.